You're listening to the Heavy Duty Parts Report. I'm your host, Jamie Irvin, and this is the podcast where you will get expert advice about the heavy duty parts you buy and keep you informed about what's happening in the industry. This episode is sponsored by truckpartsinventory.com. Lowering cost per mile is all about finding the right part quickly. At truckpartsinventory.com, you will save time by searching inventory from around North America in one place. You will save money by having the option of buying new, used, or aftermarket parts. You'll save yourself work by sending a parts request and having companies contact you. Truckpartsinventory.com is easy to use and it's free. Go to truckpartsinventory.com today. Whether you regularly buy parts yourself or you're selling parts, using credit cards and processing credit card payments is a part of daily life in the heavy-duty truck parts world. What are the risks? What are the opportunities? To help us with that, I'd like to introduce to you Ed Burris of Card Connect. Ed, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me, Jamie.
So let's start with what your company does. What does Card Connect do for its clients?
Card Connect is a credit card processor, and they're considered a tier 1 direct credit card processor in the respect that they, from the beginning of a transaction to the end of the transaction to the funding of the transaction, they do all of that. Card Connect is responsible for their encryptions. They've built their system. They put it together so that they manage it. There's no third parties. So they're a true credit card processor.
It's interesting that you describe it that way, because in the heavy-duty parts world, there is this idea that each store wants to be a one-stop shop for their customers. Sounds to me like Card Connect is providing that one-stop shop when it comes to processing credit cards.
Absolutely. And we do ACH, e-checks, anything that's digital in payments world, we can do that.
So what's your background? How did you end up with I think it's 16 years of experience in this industry?
Well, it started not in the technology or not even in finance. I was in construction and got pretty tired of the industry as a whole for several reasons. And I was looking for something new where I could be. I had 22 employees, and I wanted to be responsible for me. And so someone suggested, hey, listen, you need to go talk to this guy. I went and talked to him. And long story short, I'm here 16 years later. And I love this industry. And then sometimes I really hate it. But it is an industry that keeps me moving forward. It's something new every day.
Well, I think we can all identify with that feeling of loving and hating the industry. I personally love the truck parts industry. I stepped away from 2009 to 2016, got involved in contracting business. I started it with my wife. We built it up. We sold it in 2016, and I came back to the industry that I'd worked in since I was out of school and that I really do love. When you are kind of working in this industry and you're talking about things are changing rapidly, what kinds of things are changing?
Oh, security is number one. In 2018, 53% of all the data breaches was small and mid-sized businesses. And the average cost per transaction or per cardholder was $408. And it took about 12 months to detect these breaches or these malicious attacks. And if you do the math, depends on what you're talking about, whether you're talking about a convenience store or whether you're talking about a parts store. That's a lot of money that most businesses end up filing bankruptcy. Most of that 53% don't make it after the breach. So security is big because now it's not the kid sitting in the basement at grandma's that's trying to hack something. This is organized crime at the cyber level. And so it's very important for folks to be on that cutting edge. They need to know that they're protected. They need to have guarantees.
And things are changing when it comes to the way people are using payments. It's not just the credit card anymore. There's all kinds of payment like Apple Pay and Google Pay and those kinds of things too. So things are rapidly changing. Just what part of our world isn't rapidly changing? Let's turn our attention to the card user. So when you are buying your parts, is there any risk that you're at? What's the process in 2020 for, protecting the actual consumer?
The consumers are protected through a couple of processes. One is the dispute process. They check their statement, or they see a transaction on their online portal they didn't do, and they don't know of any way they could have ever done that transaction. So they can dispute that charge. And I've done several of those myself, where someone would try to run a transaction on my card, and how people get the number, I don't know. I mean, you could be at the restaurant and someone may take it back there and do an imprint of it, or take a picture of it and use it. So you don't know how it's used or how it's stolen, but the cardholder really doesn't have any risk, and the only thing that they lose a lot of times is time trying to correct everything, which is a headache. But they're not going to lose any money.
It's interesting. I did a number of trips to the U.S. For trade shows at the beginning of 2020, just before the travel bans kind of were put into place. And in Canada, we don't give out our card and let the waitress take it to the back. It's just not the way we do it. Everybody does it by chip now, and so they bring you the handheld thing right to your table. You put your chip in, or you tap it. You put in your code. You maintain that card the entire time. But in the U.S., a lot of times you give them the card, they take it in behind the restaurant somewhere, process the thing, they bring it back, and then you fill out your tip, sign it, and take your card and your copy of the receipt. So there is some differences in which country you're in, and I guess you need to be paying attention to that.
Absolutely, and I wish the U.S. would get to that point, because that's smart. There's no one that likes to see their card leave the table, and especially after about 3 minutes, usually you start looking for your waiter or waitress, or whoever got that card. But that's one of the ways that things get stolen. It's easy now to take a picture of the card, send it to whoever you need to send it to. I had a lady that was buying a boxer, and this guy wanted her to send money through Western Union. And I said, absolutely not. I said, if he wants to do that, you use your debit card, as long as it's got a Visa or MasterCard logo on it, or a card brand logo. You send that, and at least if something happens, you can get reimbursed. And sure enough, it was a scammer. And by using her debit card, she was able to dispute the charge, and she got is $900, and she got it back.
I've seen that kind of scam being run on like used parts, where they're like selling a transmission that normally would be $4,000, and it's $800.
Yeah,
And it's like, oh, it's such a good deal. Yeah, buyer beware. You rarely get more than you pay for.
that's exactly right.
Okay, so let's turn our attention now to the people that have to process these credit cards when their customers are buying something from them. Couple common scenarios. We have a heavy duty parts store. They're selling parts over the counter. We have a repair shop that deals with the public, and a truck comes in from out of state, out of town, needs a repair. So you've never met this person before. What are some of the things that we should be aware of so that we can protect the people listening that have to process card payments?
I would advise these folks in that scenario, I would advise them to ask how they're going to pay. And of course, someone out of town, you're not going to take a check. So it would be either cash or card. And if it is a card, whether it be debit card or credit card, I would do a pre-authorization through my software, my terminal, whatever it is, because every one of them have it. Pre-auth the card. and that's just putting the amount in. It's not doing the full transaction. It lets them know that that money's sitting there waiting to be captured for them whenever they do the sale. Then they can proceed on with it and be really secure that they're going to get paid.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense to me of why there's value in doing that. Now, and a lot of times the manager of the store or the owner of the business or the repair shop is not necessarily the one doing the frontline work and interacting with the customers on a daily basis. So what kind of training do you recommend for the frontline workers that are dealing with the public day in and day out?
Well, I guess whoever the payment processor is, or whoever the merchant service provider, like myself. So I go into my customers and I help them with questions they may have, but I also give them indicators of what may make them want to ask for an ID or ask for more information. But most of the time, the owners and the managers, they know exactly what to ask for because that's the reason they're there. And if I were to tell them anything, I would tell them, train them, tell them exactly why you do things, why you're asking, and require it. Require that these questions be asked, require that this information be asked for, and not just to run a transaction because you think the card's just automatic cash, because it's not.
Now, when you're running a business, you're not just concerned about protecting the business, you're also concerned about the financials. And there's a lot of strain on business owners to remain financially viable and to be profitable. What can you do to kind of help a person figure out a way to keep their fees at a reasonable level? Like, what are some of the things that people who have to process card payments need to be aware of?
Well, the way I love to do it, and I think it makes sense. And I can. My grandfather had a mechanic. He was a mechanic. He had his own shop, and he built in all the cost. So when he did his parts and his labor, he put all the costs, whatever it was. And most of the time, then there was not much of credit cards being used. So I just tell my customers, build in the cost of credit card fees, and that's easy. I can do that for them very easily. Um, and they probably can too. Their accountants should be able to do that. They'll figure out what that is, put that margin in to their cost, and that way, through every transaction, they're getting that reimbursement for that fee. Then at the end of the year, when they file their taxes, they can file on their Schedule C. They can file the card fees as a cost of doing business and get 100% of that wrote against their income, their business income, which saves them a little bit more. That's the best way to do it. The other way to do it is cash discount. If somebody comes in and they want to use your card, that's great. But you're going to let them know they're going to pay the fees for the card. So if that's 3%, you put 3% on it. Visa, MasterCard has rules that you have to go by to do that, and you do it. The fee goes back to the card holder. Those are the things. If I'm in a big ticket environment like these guys are, that's exactly what I'm doing. One of those two.
And the other thing too is our brains aren't really wired to think that 1%, like a 1% increase in fee, is that big of a deal. We just don't calculate that in our brains all that well. But when you start analyzing hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions of dollars in revenue processed, like 1% is a big deal.
It
So
is a big deal.
looking at your fees and working with someone who can help you to minimize your fees is part of that overall strategy.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Cost is always important, and you don't want to be. I'm pretty conservative, so I don't want to pay anything that I'm not getting a value for. So if someone's charging, if you're being charged 3.5% on your fees, what are you getting for it? That's what you have to ask yourself. And if it's no more than the guy down the street that's getting charged 2.5%, then it don't make sense. And those are the things that we try to educate our clients with is there's a value for what we do because we can move money really fast, and we can guarantee money. It's something the technology I don't understand very well, but I think that if people understand at the end of the year, if they just look at what they paid in credit card fees as a whole, and they look at that and they think, what if I could get what if I could get 30% of that money back? That's a big amount of money.
If there's one thing that you'd like people listening today to take away from our conversation, what is that one thing?
I would say don't trust things that are said, trust things that are resourced. You need to see it in writing. You need to see it through, it's kind of like the PCI validated point-to-point encryption. There's a website that's got a list of companies that has that classification. Don't take my word for it. You need to look at my company on that list. And when you see that, then you know we're there. Business owners want to trust people because one thing, they don't have time to look it up, resource, or they just don't want to. But it might be worth researching to save a little bit of time and money and some headache down the line. And then the other thing is don't get into contracts. Never, ever get into a payment contract that locks you into a time slot and there's a cancellation fee. When you do that, then you're just setting yourself up for a lot of heartburn.
You've been listening to the Heavy Duty Parts Report. My name is Jamie Irvin, and today we've been talking to Ed from Card Connect. If you'd like to learn more, go to cardconnect.com/partner/Ed-Burris. I've put the link in the show notes so you don't have to remember that. It's one click and you'll get right through to Ed's website. Ed, thank you for being on the podcast today.
Thank you, Jamie.
Have you subscribed to the podcast yet? Go to heavydutypartsreport.com today to subscribe to the podcast, and don't forget to give us a 5-star rating and review on the podcast player of your choice. I'd like to remind everyone to focus on cost per mile over purchase price, and let's keep those trucks and trailers rolling. You can watch our next video, and don't forget, subscribe to the YouTube channel.